Welcome to episode 195 of Trek Live. In this week's episode, we're going to talk about rewatching in the current climate. But before we get into that, Bill, how you doing this morning?
Doing well. Happy to be here. Excited to talk about this today, as always. I feel like I always say that, but it's always true. How are you doing?
Doing good. Excited to jump into the topic at hand today. I think it's a really relevant one, and a lot of people have different experiences and different ways they do it, so I think it's an all-encompassing kind of topic, and it should be fun to dive into it this morning.
I feel like it's there's so many different ways at this point to do it. There's so much more content now than there was just a few years ago. So I think that opens the door to an examination of the different approaches and what we like about each possibility. And it's not even just rewatching, like our title kind of implies. Like there's the full rewatch approach. That's like one lane, and then if you just kind of feel like putting it on, or you want to watch a thing here or there, like what are the different ways to do it and different approaches to finding things to watch when there's 800 some choices out there. So looking forward to it. Before we do, though, we have a couple little things that we tend to do at the beginning. For my rewatch recap, you don't have one because you're tied up on yours. Yours is all wrapped up. You're in between. I watched, since the last time we did this, just a couple episodes of Voyager. 4 episodes of Voyager, actually. Spirit Folk, Ashes to Ashes, Child's Play, and Good Shepherd, which is a little bit of a mixed bag. Yeah, it's got some really good stuff in it. Good Shepherd's great. I really like that. It's inventive. It's different. It's a spin on Lower Decks, but it does it really in a pretty fresh, way. I think. I don't think it never feels tired or it doesn't feel like a rehash of that concept. It feels like it takes the general sort of overlay of one-off lower deck characters and putting them on the forefront, and but this is a very different story, very different kinds of characters, and I really enjoy Janeway in it. I think Kate Mulgrew's great. I think the guest stars are all good. Child's Play is really strong too. A good science fiction concept with that species that lives at the sort of the mouth of a Borg transwarp conduit, and how they kind of try to survive that, and the ethical quandaries that they've put themselves in with their tactics. It dives into the Icheb character a good little bit, kind of establishing him as a sort of staple for this last season and change. And then Spirit Folk, I'm not very high on. In fact, I might go as far as to say it's my least favorite episode of Voyager, which might be controversial in some circles. I've gathered in just kind of seeing reactions to me sharing that I was watching that one on Discord and on Twitter, that some people actually kind of dig it. There are fans of the Fairhaven storyline out there. Not among them. But that one in particular I struggle with. And Ashes to Ashes is fine. It's a
middle of the road.
Middle of the road Harry Kim episode, I think. Neat concept, another good science fiction idea, like so many of these, especially later half of Voyager episodes have. But getting towards the end of season 6, which means I'm getting towards the end of Voyager. I got season 7 left, and then I'm into Enterprise.
Nice.
And then the new stuff. So kind of coming down the home stretch of this rewatch 3.0.
Nice.
Yeah. And then lastly, before we get into the topic, episode survey time.
I knew it was coming.
Yeah, it's we're into the new era with this. TOS, TNG, DS9, Voyager, and Enterprise are all in the bag. They've been completed. We did the movies last week, and we're doing Discovery Season 1 this week. So I'm curious to ask you, to the best of your recollection, maybe with the help of an episode listing, might be helpful, because I know you haven't rewatched much Discovery or much new stuff. You're not like me with kind of like every few months kind of finding yourself back in the mall of that show. What do you think? Do you have episodes that kind of stick out to you as favorites?
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm gonna go with. I'm looking at the episode list right now.
Yeah.
Context is for Kings for sure.
Yep.
Lethe for sure. Into the Forest I go for sure. Man, and then after that, there's a couple because I got two more, right?
Two more.
Yeah.
It's an underratedly good season.
Yeah,
I think.
and
There are episodes that.
Yeah. It's also tough because, at least this season, it's tough to just pick one episode because they blend together a little bit more than our current season.
Yeah, I would agree with that, especially in the back half with the Mirror Universe. I think that last chunk, it can be difficult to maybe pick a favorite of that like run of 4 or 5 when they're really locked into that story. So I get that. I've gathered that just in the responses too on Twitter. I think I've heard from a few people that it naturally was more of a challenge because of the serialization.
Yeah,
to be expected.
Did I choose what's past this prologue?
Nope. So that's 4.
4, and then I'll do Magic to make the sadist man go mad. I really enjoy that sci-fi concept. I think it may feel a little out of place for some people, at least for kind of in the middle of the season. But I really enjoy that sci-fi concept. So yeah.
Very good. I got your votes. You should be good to go.
Cool.
Thank you. And as always, those results come out on Tuesday evening, usually Eastern time. I'll post the chart showing all the results of the different ballots, and then there's a poll of the final 4 to kind of pick a final winner. And it's interesting. Sometimes the nomination leader, the episode that gets the most votes on the survey, doesn't end up winning that final poll. Those two things do not always go hand in hand. Many times it does. The ones that you would expect to be kind of no-brainers tend to be, but there are times that it doesn't happen. So it's always an interesting thing to look for. I think get into the topic at hand. This week, like I said at the beginning, we're kind of just talking about different approaches to watching Star Trek. We both took different approaches in our own, most recent or currently running rewatches. There's difference there. I think part of this conversation might be spurred by our good friend Thad is taking a very interesting and fresh approach himself, which kind of demonstrates yet another way to do this. Why don't you, I guess I'll start, for anybody who doesn't know, if you're stumbling into this and don't follow me on Twitter and aren't aware, when I rewatch Star Trek, I tend to go in like air date order, or at least with the 24th century shows, watching them the way that they premiered. So I watch Deep Space Nine kind of interlocking with The Next Generation and Voyager. I don't watch those shows in a 7-season run independently. I go back and forth between Chain of Command and then it's Emissary, and then I go through sometimes 12, 13, 14 episode runs where it's a flip back and forth between a TNG and a DS9 or a Voyager and a DS9, driven by when the episodes aired. I have a spreadsheet that puts all that data together, and there's a chronological list of those episodes, and that's kind of the way I tend to do it, which is not the way that I think most people tend to do it.
But what
about you?
But it was how it was how it was released. So you get that kind of taken back in time, to 1994, 1995 when that was happening. So
correct.
Yeah.
And to be fair to myself, to advocate for it a little bit or at least defend why I do it that way. or explain why I do it that way. I'm offended, but that I lived through it. That's how I watched it initially. So in my own memory, oftentimes I kind of tie episodes together a little bit, because that's when I feel nostalgic for it, and I think back to that first experience when I was in elementary school, middle school, high school. Not so much high school, but in those early years when Deep Space Nine was running alongside those other shows, they were running together, and I would sit down on a Wednesday night and watch an episode of Voyager and then an episode of Deep Space Nine. So that's, I think, why I'm drawn to it, because it's core to my own Star Trek experience growing up.
Which is very different from the generation that's watching Star Trek today. They get it released on Thursday. It's not so much a timestamp anymore. It's usually 12 o'clock, midnight. So when you wake up, you'll have it ready to go. But they have this year kind of toyed with the 2 shows running at the same time. A
little bit,
which is kind of a throwback to what kind of Bill's rewatch style is kind of. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but recapture I don't think is the word, but just similar rewatch styles to when you first watched it, which is cool.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think a lot of us assumed, based on Paramount has definitely been, and CBS have been very kind of guarded with the schedule for this new stuff, and there always, I feel like all along the way there have been these assumptions based on the limited information we get about the way it's going to go. And there was a period there where it looked a lot like Discovery and Prodigy were going to run together concurrently, side by side for a big portion of those seasons. And that, in my little spreadsheet that I used to track, I had it all ready to go, and it looked like those 90s days. It had Prodigy, Discovery, and I was like, wow, I'm going to get back. Like the way it's been for all these years is I have that big chunk of my rewatch where it's like that, and then I get through it, and it's kind of back to the more traditional approach because that's the way it aired. So it was like, oh man, there's going to be a second section of this rewatch experience that's going to be interlocking shows again. But it turns out, like right now, the way it's been so far, they've had these like little mid-season breaks that they've done, and it hasn't quite been that way, which presents a different kind of a thing. Instead of interlocking episodes, when I get to this point in my rewatch, it's going to be like 5 episodes of Prodigy, 7 episodes of Discovery, 5 episodes of Prodigy, back to Discovery. Like that's a different kind of a vibe that I don't love as much. I feel like that's like a little bit more of like a false start, gain some momentum with the show and then pull back. So I'm not loving that for the rewatch prospects, but it's what they're doing. And if I follow my sort of, if I stay true to my approach, that's what I'll be doing.
You'll have to watch it in chunks now.
Yep.
No,
what about? Go ahead. No.
Real quick, just here's what you have to do. You just have to watch that in a day. That chunk in a day. So the next day, then you could get that chunk in.
With Prodigy, that's certainly doable. With like little 5-episode chunks of Prodigy at 25 minutes apiece, that's more than doable. The way I tend to do it over a weekend. So you're right. That's definitely an asset. At least it'll probably play like that and make it a little easier. But what about you? I mean, we've talked about mine, at least the way I've been doing it with the rewatch part of this. Your approach has been very different, with kind of going with your gut and not necessarily going in a specific order. How do you kind of choose the way you've done it in the past, at least?
So my style is just usually it's usually just one show at a time, and putting that show under the microscope, putting an episode under the microscope, and spreading out the shows a little bit longer, taking a little bit longer time, just allowing the the episodes and the seasons and the shows to be able to breathe a little bit. I do tend to try to take breaks at the end of a show, but for me, it's mostly from what I'm feeling. I think this last one, I started with Voyager because that's my favorite, and then kind of bounce around from there. Um, but I think this next rewatch coming up, it's gonna be a little bit more structured and instead of just me being like, well, I feel like just starting this this time. So that's the way I do it. Right now, like when there's breaks or if I've just finished a show and I just want to, there's some other avenues that I use to just to be able to put on a show, and it may be the show that I just currently watched or have watched. But so I like to use Pluto a lot, and now currently there's a new Paramount Plus channel that's actually
Live channel.
I kind of run two or three that are actually different. Instead of Pluto is primarily DNG. So, but yeah, that's my rewatch strategy. I'd like to get a little bit more intentional with what shows I watch, how I start. So I feel like it's gonna, at least for me, right now, it's gonna be like chronological. So I'll start with TOS, and then go to the new stuff. I don't think I'm gonna do air date order or anything like that, and I'm gonna stick with. I like the microscopic approach to just setting a show aside and then really diving deep into that and only that, and that makes for the rewatch a little bit longer because it just and that's my goal really is to make the rewatch as long as possible. So by the time I'm done, like I've talked about a million times on the show, the Golden Gate theory, the Golden Gate being that once it's painted, by the time they're done painting it, it's time to start again. So that's similar to my rewatch. So by the time I'm done with it, I do need a break, definitely, but I'm always eager and excited to get back into it. But it's subsidized with things like Pluto and the new Paramount channel. So
yeah. The options to put on kind of in the old style, like it's still around. You can still turn on like BBC America if you have traditional TV here in the United States at least, and get a random episode of The Next Generation or Voyager, and I think Deep Space Nine's on there now. Like there's channels that run it. There's a channel called H&I, Heroes and Icons, I think it's called. That if you
wish
you have
I still had that channel.
Yeah, I don't have it anymore either. But they do a really fun thing where they'll have, I think it's 8 o'clock is TOS, 9 o'clock is TNG, and so on through Enterprise at midnight. And like one episode of each show that run, one episode at a time, like in a predictably, next episode, next night kind of flow. And it creates some fun like combinations of episodes that are never quite the same because each show has a different number of episodes. So every time around, when you hit the next, cycle, things are paired differently again. Like that's kind of what I miss, and I kind of wish there was more availability for it. Like I miss the random element to some extent. Like full disclosure, like when we sit and chat off air, a lot of the time we'll want to put Star Trek on in the background just to kind of have something to kind of take a peek at and look at. And having that sort of out of our control, whatever is going to flow, whatever's going to come on is appealing for situations like that. And that's like living outside of the rewatch where there's sort of a structured approach to like looking at the whole of the franchise. And like you, I do rely on Pluto and the Paramount Plus live channel now for that. And they're great, but I really, really wish that there was more randomness. Pluto tends to be, like you said, the Next Generation, at least in since I've been following it and having it on. And they run, episodes, consecutively. It runs in the order that you would expect them to run in. And I wish there was a service like that bounced around, and like it's an episode of Deep Space Nine, and then it's an episode of Enterprise, and then maybe Picard comes on, and it sounds like the CBS or the Paramount Plus.
It's gonna try to.
Has some,
it's
kind of getting there. It's got multiples of shows at its disposal. It does bounce around. I put it on last night a little bit, and Picard was on. And I like that. I like being able to put it on and not having any idea. But I really what I kind of really wish for is the idea, like the other thing that we do in our Trek After Dark hangouts and just hanging out, you and myself, uh, just casually chatting, is we'll use the Memory Alpha random episode, kind of random article generator, which is kind of now defunct, but it's still around if you can find ways to kind of sidestep their attempts to hide it or change it. But having that truly random selection is nice, and I wish there was a more automated thing to throw on that gave us that. That's the one thing I kind of wish for.
Yeah.
For the outside rewatch.
And I mean, you could do it. You could assign an episode a numerical value and then put it into a random number generator. There's ways to do it, but it's just not. It's not the same as that excitement of turning on the TV and just not knowing what you're gonna get. So yeah, I do definitely miss that as well.
And inevitably, when we're in a Trek After Dark situation, or it's even just you and me, if we get to a point where it's like rolling for an episode through a random episode generator, or like you said, given, like I have a spreadsheet, like I've mentioned, and all the episodes have a numeric value. So you can use like random.gov or random.org and throw a series of numbers in and say, give me one. And, inevitably, when you get into that kind of a dynamic, you'll pick an episode, or an episode will come up, and then it's a discussion, and it ends up being, which is fun. It's definitely that can generate some really fun times and some cool ways to talk about episodes, and get to people's preferences and stuff. But sometimes it'd be cool to, like, if we don't have the element of choice and Sub Rosa comes on, it's Sub Rosa. We don't have the chance to veto Sub Rosa and decide against it and roll again until you get something you like. Like that, what I kind of wish for is like a completely out of our hands, true random sprinkling of all the shows, all the episodes, where there's no element of not that one, for the more like social settings, when you're just kind of, or the more, I just want background noise. Sometimes at work I'll put it on, like on an iPad while I'm working, and just have like an earbud in.
I'd get too distracted.
Sometimes it can be like that. If it's a slow day and there's not a whole lot going on, it can be helpful for me. But that's my number one sort of wish for these kinds of things.
Another wish that I have is just watching new stuff. I wish that, I know at least this season with Discovery and some of the other shows that premiered this year, it's been tough outside of the U.S. to be able to get some. We've been spoiled now, and that kind of goes into maybe the difference of rewatching now as opposed to, say, in 2003 or 2005 when Enterprise was kind of wrapping up and you still wanted to rewatch it. You had to rely on physical media, at least at that point, or tapes that you had pre-recorded when it aired. But now it feels like we're just so spoiled with rewatching that everything's on demand, and to be able to easily just find something, at least for us in the States. I know it's been tough with some Discovery and some Prodigy and Picard as well, I believe. But yeah, it's just crazy how rewatching now is so easy. It's so much easier than it was, say, at the end of maybe Enterprise's run. So, but that's the interesting thing though, is because correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, but what saved the franchise almost was technically people rewatching like TOS episodes and in syndication and things like that. So technically rewatching saved Star Trek.
It does. Yeah. Oh yeah. I really kind of chalk this dynamic up as like sort of one of the calling cards of Star Trek. It's not something that, I mean, I guess it's this way with many fandoms, but whether it's Star Wars or Lord of the Ring. Like the people want to go back and relive and re-examine. But yes, definitely one of the long-running phenomena with Star Trek is this strong desire within its fandom to just constantly. And I think what you said with the Golden Gate Bridge approach, with now it's so much easier to kind of live with that approach, because you're right. Like when you start, if you're going to go like you were saying, if you're going to start with TOS, when you watch The Man Trap to start it, if that's the way you're going to go, by the time you get to just the Vulcan hello, like starting the new stuff, by the time you get to the Vulcan hello, it's been a long time since you watched The Man Trap. So it really does trap you in this like cyclical, okay, I got to start again. And that's the new phenomenon because there's so much of it. But yeah, even back in the 70s, I'm not old enough to have experienced it, but one of the legends of Star Trek is certainly the people just constantly perpetually rewatching it on syndication, those 79 episodes. So you're right, rewatching is pretty core to the Star Trek's history. But to kind of go back to what you were saying too, with like it's so much easier now, totally true. I'm a person who grew up in a house with a dad who religiously used a VCR to tape new episodes as they came out. I had a video library at my disposal for The Next Generation through Deep Space Nine and Voyager.
That's awesome.
And I kind of carried the torch with like the back half of Deep Space Nine, back half of Voyager, and all of Enterprise. I kind of did that. I did the recording and kept the video library going. And yeah, the what we have now with especially with Paramount Plus now today, if I open Paramount Plus on my profile, I have all the shows with their logos right there, all 13 movies, like literally a click away. And like 10, 12, 15-year-old me, that's like a what dream. Like that's like
would
crazy
kill for that
notion. Yeah, that's like just having that instant access to without having to go bounce around with different tapes and play around with skipping through fast forwarding through a VHS tape to get to episode 3 on the tape if I want to watch Cause and Effect or something. Like just being able to boop, 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 and go from that to an episode of Voyager, to an episode of Discovery. That's a huge gift, and it makes it so much easier to do the stuff we're talking about. So that's definitely true, and I'm grateful for that. And it's a whole new world we're living in for sure. But it's true, even without those tools. You're right that, speaking for myself, back in the 90s when we did not have those tools, I was still rewatching Star Trek, and I was still kind of pretty much taking a similar approach to what I'm doing now. With even back then, I would like revisit those seasons, like DS9 season 5, Voyager season 3, with kind of like a bouncing back and forth approach. So it's pretty baked into my my mentality with Star Trek at this point to do it that way, for better or worse.
Nice.
We have Jimmy77 and Cyber Honey in the chat. Hello to you both. Thank you as always for swinging by and spending some time. Everyone. Yeah. Cyber Honey's remembering can pay $9.99 and watch all Star Trek she wants. It started with VHS and then went out and had to buy everything on DVD. Me too. I did that as well, buying all the physical media. I've spent, my family, even beyond just me, I spent a ton of money on Star Trek physical media over the years. And that's the sort of beauty of the current situation, is if you don't want to do that, you still can, and we do. We're definitely the collecting type. So we're not out of that game, but having the access through the digital world is definitely nice. Jimmy77 says he's currently rewatching Enterprise up to the episode Forgotten, season 3. That's awesome. Says it's great to have every episode movie at your fingertips. Yeah, it really strikes me every time I go to the Paramount Plus screen and I see that. Like, you get screenshots of the now 10 shows, or 12, depending on how you count them, and the 13 movies just like right there on a single screen. It's just insanity.
Yes. Yep. I think that's
the new stuff. Is really a new. It's just just a few years ago, I said this on Twitter. last night, it really occurred to me. It randomly hits me that just 5 years ago there were 5 Star Trek shows, and it was like a finite sort of closed book. It was like these 700 and some chapters in a book, and that's what it was, right? And the 13 movies and the 5 shows is what it existed as. And right now there are 5 shows in production. Like, so the amount of
so
Star
double
Trek
that
in 5 years,
and the couple timeline as well.
Yeah, and they have that, like, it's just grown to the point where it's like it's just this, and that really does impact, I think, these last 5 years, how people will approach these kinds of things. Hey, how to watch it, how to rewatch it, what do they want to watch, what do they not want to watch? It's just such a different animal than it was just a few short years ago, with the amount of content and the variety of options. And granted that there are people out there who prefer one show to the other. Not everybody's a lunatic like me who kind of loves it all equally and is a pretty pretty gung ho about that. But even for somebody who has like strong preferences to this show or that show, like there's just so much of it and so many different ways you can go and different approaches you can take, that it's been a heck of a few years. The combination of the new content and these access options with streaming services.
Yeah, and it seems like the new stuff is trying to take advantage of the possibility of rewatching. Like I think that with the more serialized kind of storylines and there's including so many like little Easter eggs and little nuggets and things that will benefit from rewatching. It's just cool to see.
Totally true. Yeah, rewatching a serialized show with all the callbacks and the kind of pre-planned character arcs is a different animal too, and it kind of definitely I think it's asking for it. And I would advocate for it. Give these shows a second chance. Give it time. Let them sit. Go back to them, and watch them in that sort of binge kind of approach that they're kind of built for these days, which is all the more easy now with streaming services and the access.
Yeah.
One thing I've kind of asked you off air a couple of times. You mentioned right at the beginning when we did the survey, you haven't gone back and rewatched like Discovery. What would your plan with that be? Like, are you waiting for the show to be done to kind of do that and kind of incorporate it into that sort of plan? Or like, and I know you're a big proponent for give the show time, like let it sit, make yourself hungry for it, let it breathe a little bit. So like, do you have an idea in your mind about when you would like incorporate that in?
I'm not sure, because it's similar to TOS in that there's not a lot of sample size, and I feel like watching it for the first time, I remember it more than some of these other shows, and so some of these other shows have a greater sample size. They're longer seasons, 20-something episodes a season, where these newer shows don't have that long of a season, and so I'm not sure if I'm not saying I'm never gonna rewatch them, but I don't know. It's easier to remember these newer shows, I guess, and maybe that's because I'm watching them, first run, like just episode a week. And
I think that's a big part of it.
And to me, that just makes me pay attention a little bit more, and just because it's hyper focused just on this one episode a week, which that in itself could be a fun rewatch style, which would take forever. But these newer shows are just a combination of shorter sample size, because the shows aren't done yet, but also the seasons are much shorter, and to be honest, like I remember them more than some of these 20-something episode seasons of these older shows, and I didn't watch them first run, so I feel like when you watch them first run, like it's I feel like it makes a bigger impression when you sit down to watch an episode for the first time.
I think you hit the nail on the head on why that is. I think because of the sort of experiencing it in the first run, consuming it in that one episode a week, especially with doing the kinds of things we do here, like whether back in the day it was talking about the episode on Trek Live or course setting, like we've had these opportunities to really dive into the individual episodes and live with them for a week. That's a very different thing than rewatching the way that we typically rewatch with, maybe series of episodes over the course of a couple of days and then moving on and like that. And you definitely touched on another thing that I've always kind of wanted to do, but again, you nailed it. It would take so long. Like I really admire shows like Mission Log, the podcast that does one episode a week chronologically, because it does that sort of, the benefit to approach like that is it sort of mimics that experience with the old stuff. Like if you took the approach of like, I'm going to watch The Man Trap on Wednesday night with a friend, or a friend's going to watch it too, and then we're going to talk about it, and then wait a week to watch the next one. That creates that sort of, it forces you to really hone in and focus on that single episode and dive into it. And I think that really does create more of an impression in your head than the sort of bang, 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 one episode after another, where they sort of can kind of blend together, even though they're not serialized and they're very episodic. That's just a different, a different approach. And I think it leaves a different impression. And I've always been intrigued by taking a project like that on to sort of mimic that experience and to give the episodes true opportunities to breathe independently. But again, with 800 some of them, it's it's such a long prospect.
Almost 3 years, maybe. It's just
more than that. Yeah, I mean.
Well, what I'm saying, like, if you were to like follow air date, because you could also if you could double up with 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Or however they came out as overlapped.
Yeah, you could do that to create a little bit more of a rapid, speed it up a little bit, at least in the big chunk in the middle there. That's a good idea. But even with that, it's a years long, and it could very well be a very worthwhile. Like it's just a matter of commitment.
Yeah, that's
deciding to stick with it. And do you run that? Like my temptation would be like, I couldn't just do that. I couldn't live with just, because I love it all so much. For 52 or for 79 weeks, I wouldn't want to just live in TOS as much as I love TOS. I would have to like run that alongside other things, or be able
that's like a year and a half in itself.
Yeah, it would be a tough commitment to hold true to just
weeks.
That. It would just have to be beyond that. But I would enjoy that approach to giving the episodes that little extra bit of juice to rattle around. And I think that would probably be the best way to try to see the episodes through new eyes, which is another element that I try to do with each rewatch. I try to force myself to, through things like over the years, I've done these rewatches on Twitter 3 times now. I'm on the 3rd one. And the first time around, I did little reviews on Twitter and graded them. The second time around, I incorporated like grade polls and tried to gather community data, kind of like I'm doing now with a different kind of way. I try to create some avenue within the rewatch to force myself to, look at the episodes through new eyes and to incorporate some element to challenge myself to, bring something new to the table and to resist the urge to let it be white noise, like just a comfortable blanket to throw on and have on in the background and not really give it much attention beyond, I'm doing it just because this is what I do. Like when I'm winding down on a Friday night and I don't feel like doing anything, putting on Star Trek because it's comfortable. Like that's one way to do it, and that's got its value too. But I like to try to challenge myself to bring a little bit more to the table and try to get something satisfying intellectually and otherwise out of the experience.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's another major thing that kind of weighs on me when I go through these things.
Yeah. Similar to me, I the reason why my rewatches are so long is because my life has changed and my perspective has changed. So if things in my life change, it's going to change my perception of the episode and what I get from it. And so that's also again, what Bill mentioned, big proponent and why I still rewatch.
Yeah, there's no doubt that high school me got very different things out of the same episodes than well into my career me. Working as a professional person and out of school and living that adult life.
Yeah.
As best as I can. And those just different elements that are just inherent to being a human being create fresh perspectives on their own. And I think that's especially because of the nature of Star Trek, because they're morality tales and their reflections on the human experience and being a friend and being a coworker and being a subordinate or a supervisor. Like, all these things are so ingrained into the DNA of the show that depending on where you are in life, whether you're a student or you're a line employee or a supervisor or a boss or whatever your role is in the professional world or the world as a whole, depending on where you are in that cycle, it's going to change the way that some of these stories land on you and the different takeaways you might have. And I've definitely lived through that. I've experienced that. Different episodes, different lessons have spoken to me in different ways. Things that I've seen dozens of times sometimes feel fresh and different because of just the passage of time and being at different points in my life.
But all that to say, I think what Bill is trying to say is, like, to be able to keep rewatching, you need a little bit of a different wrinkle to keep bringing you back, because it is daunting. Like, I hear this a bunch of times. Like, how can you keep getting through those 800 episodes? Well, you need just a few different wrinkles here and there, and it really does make it easy. And it's not just there's different strategies too. Like Bill and I have talked about, taking breaks helps a lot too. But yeah, I think another big proponent is what Bill's kind of saying, is that wrinkle, that different approach to be able to look at an episode differently, to be able to get more feedback from the community, which is another great resource for rewatching, is the community itself. That little difference just keeps it fresh and new, which I think is pretty much all our goals. All people who rewatch goals, to keep it as fresh as possible, but still make it feel different.
I think for a lot of people, the whole idea with the rewatch is like this weird combination of trying to recapture the feeling of seeing it for the first time and having that nostalgic value come through, but also, yes, like trying to see it through new eyes at the same time. Like that's a tightrope to walk. And when it's really working and you're really feeling it, that's what's successfully happening. You're recapturing that. This is why I loved it, and this is why I, there's a reason I'm coming back to this, and there's new things to offer by coming back to it. And then on top of that, I think you touched on the community aspect. I'd be rewatching either way. I'm sure, whether I was whether social media existed and Trek Live existed and things like that. But having things like this, outlets like this, people like you to talk to, Dan, and when we have Trek After Dark hangouts, and just being on Twitter and having people to interact with and bounce ideas off of, and see other points of view on these things that we've watched over the years. That's another huge motivator to keep going and to keep going back. Again, like you were saying with the Golden Gate approach, by the time you restart, new people have come into your life. Like especially in the social media thing, you've met different people, you've come into contact with different people, and different ideas are shared. And when growing up for myself, like I grew up largely without really talking about Star Trek with people outside of my house. Like I didn't have friends who loved it the same way I did for the vast majority of my young years, and I kind of consumed it in a vacuum and didn't have that outlet to like really talk about it. And that's social media's got its ups and downs, as we've talked about many times, but having that connection to people that love the same thing, and having daily interactions with people, if you choose to have them, about this thing that we all kind of collectively love, does also shape that perspective and give new textures and colors to the whole experience of being a fan and rewatching. Rob is here and is touching on another one that I can't say that I've necessarily done a whole lot of, but it's a great approach if you can find yourself in a situation where you can do it. He's talking about rewatching with his partner who is watching it for the first time. That's a great excuse to do it, a great reason to do it, and a great way to ensure that you're seeing it through fresh eyes. And I'm envious of that. That you're living the dream, Rob, in a lot of ways. That's super cool. And that's a whole nother layer of the rewatch experience that you're getting to access. And it's so awesome. And thanks for stopping by as always. Good to see you. Any other thoughts on the way we do this?
Yeah. I would just encourage to just to find whatever, if you want to dive into this rewatch game, just to find whatever works for you, but also don't be afraid to change it, because sometimes it can get stagnant, and then also take breaks and have community interaction on Twitter and on this show and other podcasts, because that helps as well. That really helps, I don't know, keep the flame alive when it gets because it is a tough grind at some points with some runs of episodes, but I think having all the tools and everything with you, it makes it definitely worth it. So
couldn't agree more. I think you said it, stick to your own guts, your guns on how to do it. Like, I think finding your own way and not being pressured and feeling like, oh, I got to do it this way because other people do it that way. Like, no, like, do it the way that you feel like you're going to get the most value out of it. Spice it up when you need to with different, approaches. Don't be afraid to change it. And I totally also an advocate for, put yourself out there, like find ways to engage with people who also love it. Whether it's here on this show, through the chat, meet people, be active on Twitter, find yourself a community of fans who feel welcoming and feel like they're our Discord server is a great place if you love Star Trek, and you want to have positive, conversations with people. It's a great way to meet fans, and have those connections with people to share the love. And every opportunity to do that, I think, is valuable and will enhance your fandom. Trust me. Speaking as somebody who, like I said, operated in a vacuum for a lot of years, that is like the great renaissance for me, is having people to bounce ideas off of and take surveys and poll results and gather all this kind of data that I like to do. That's like the dream for me, is to like interact with people and to get different viewpoints and to see what people think. Like that's the kind of stuff that keeps my fire burning for all this stuff.
Yeah. If there's anything else, you guys know the drill. The discussion does not stop here. Twitter and the Discord server, as Bill just mentioned. Next week we will be back for another topic that Bill and I are both excited about, that we'll kind of talk about a little bit more on Twitter and in the coming days. It's going to be, it's kind of, this kind of perfect ties into Rewatch, but we're going to be putting together runs of episodes, and we're going to have to find the commonality in those episodes. So it should make for a fun episode. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks everybody in chat. You guys are awesome. You guys make the show. It's always great when we've got a live chat. So thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you everybody. We bring more to the table than we can express, and can't thank you enough for taking the time to hang out with us and share your ideas and thoughts. Cyber Honey, I see your idea for an episode. It's notched, and I'm sure that will happen.
Yes.
As always, we appreciate the brainstorming ideas for episodes. We could use them many times. So appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks everybody. We'll see you guys next week.
See you everybody.